Welcome to Warehousing Unboxed, an IWLA podcast. I'm Jay Capron, go by JC around here at IWLA. Happy to be with you for another episode. We've got a great show lined up for you today. PFAS to Protection, Insights from Vertex's Steve Kowkabany. He's going to join us and tell us about a partnership that we have with the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. We're excited about that. And you can actually get a discount by being an IWLA member on some protection services. We'll talk about what that all means. If you own a warehouse and you know you need to keep everyone protected from fire, you're going to want to be tuned in and know more about what we're talking about today. So from PFAS to Protection, Insights from Vertex's Steve Kowkabany, coming up right after this. Customer expectations are accelerating. They want faster onboarding, real-time visibility, and on-the-channel capabilities that legacy warehouse management systems simply can't deliver. Whether you're wrestling with legacy systems or with spreadsheets, forward-thinking 3PLs are winning new business with Legiwa.io, the WMS designed specifically for warehouse-based 3PL operations. Enjoy location-based multi-tenant optimization, lightning-fast consumer onboarding in days, not months, AI-driven efficiency that unlocks your growth regardless of staffing levels. This isn't about upgrading your technology, it's about staying competitive when customers have more choices than ever. Stop adapting your WMS, get one that understands 3PLs. Legiwa.io, built for 3PL operations. Visit Legiwa.com for your no-obligation demo. Welcome back to Warehousing Unboxed, an IWLA podcast. Today's episode's entitled PFAS to Protection, Insights from Vertex's Steve Kowkabany, and he's going to join us here in just a minute. One of the things that we're going to talk about today is our partnership with the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. So before we get to Steve, who is patiently waiting to join the program, we're going to have Eric Byer join us. He is the president and CEO of the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. Eric, how you doing today?
Doing great, JC. Thanks for the opportunity to connect.
Happy to have you, Eric. So we're excited to be partnering with you. For those that don't know, there's a long-standing partnership between the two organizations. We kind of made things official last year. Maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, thanks, JC. We have had a good relationship in years past. In fact, Jay was just in town, and we broke bread over lunch, I think, last week, which is great. But we have what they call an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. But what we do is we work together on all kinds of different things, whether it's services like the offering that Vertex has on the PFAS advisory service side, to working on public policy and government relations issues, so Capitol Hill or regulatory matters. The rail merger, for example, between NS and UP is a big concern to both of our organizations. So we're going to work together on seeing how we can oppose that effort. Those types of things is what we regularly do. And we also encourage our members, just like you guys do for your folks, to come and attend each other's events. So whether it's our operations event, which we just had in Louisville, it's called ChemEdge, and it's very focused on the operation and safety and regulatory side, to like our annual meeting in November, and you guys have your annual meeting in the spring and have some fantastic speakers. So we'd like to show up and support each other's events. So you throw all that together, kind of the kitchen sink, approach, if you will, between the government relations side, the event side, and the different offerings. We try to support each other by having our folks participate if they can.
So yeah, our partnership, there's a lot of areas where there's a lot of crossover, where what's important to you is important to us. And as anyone who's been involved in government affairs, as I have for my career, and many people that join us for our fly-in know, your voice is even stronger when you have strong partners and you have a unified voice. And that's really the way to get things done. So we really appreciate the partnership. It's been great. We are certainly happy to promote some of the things that you have going on. While I've got you, I can mention that you guys have your virtual safety summit coming up October 7th and 8th. You can join industry leaders, safety experts, and ACD members at the 2025 Fire Safety Summit. It's presented by AS Distribution Consulting, LLC, and that's during National Fire Protection Week. And there's a special member price for IWLA members and ACD members, so you can check that out. You have information on your website about that?
We do. It's under the AS website, and you can go to acd-chem.com, and it gives you all the ways to connect with our AS Distribution Consulting. Just so you all know, it's essentially our separate LLC, but it's a tie to what we do, and we do all of our training in person, online, and provide some of the training services that are supporting those efforts. And so this is kind of our first foray. We've never done it. It's going to be strictly virtual. It's inexpensive, but we're hoping that it'll provide some value add to our members, especially those that have infrastructure in place, and making sure they're protecting their infrastructure, their employees. It's not something we've done before, and we're hoping that it'll be. The numbers right now are coming in, and it's looking really good. So I'm hoping that your folks can participate if they're so inclined.
Yeah, absolutely. We just popped it in our latest newsletter. It'll be in our e-news coming up here this week as well. October 7th and 8th, a virtual fire safety summit. And you get a discount for being an IWLA member. And on that note, you also get a discount for other services for being an IWLA member. And Eric, why don't you welcome in our guest here today? It's Stephen Kowkabany.
Thanks, JC. Yep, Steve, we're thrilled to have him in. He works for the Vertex Companies LLC. We've created a partnership with him about a year and a half, 2 years ago. PFAS is obviously the topic du jour nowadays, especially if you've got warehouses and you've got any kind of foam fire suppression, firefighting foam kind of situation, because obviously with chemicals, you've got to have that in your water suppression systems to put out fires. It's almost, I come from the aviation community. When you have Jet A, you have to have PFAS in what you put the Jet A out. Otherwise, it does not go out with just water. But at the same time, you're seeing in the world we live in, the pressure that you're getting from the regulators at the federal, state, and local level on getting rid of PFAS. If you're looking at the insurance industry and how they're putting, a lot of safeguards in place and not even covering to some degree. If you have PFAS in your piping or stuff like that, it becomes a real challenge. And so what we did is we formed a partnership with Steve and Vertex to say, hey, we'll come out, we'll evaluate what you got going on and what you need to do to take next steps to address what could be coming down the pike, which is the phasing out of PFAS if some kind of alternative comes into place. So with that, Steve, the floor is yours, man. I appreciate you hopping on and really do appreciate the partnership you have. I know you've been working with our members here fairly actively in recent months. So the floor is yours, man.
Eric, JC, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So you're a busy man. I have a little of your background here. You oversee services within your group of 25 engineers and technical professionals performing warehouse fire protection for services for Vertex. Many of our listeners may be familiar with Vertex, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then what you're up to?
Sure. I'm a fire protection engineer, so it's a specialized form of engineering. You don't hear about it a lot. There's about 3,000 in the country. We've got 25 or so here within Vertex, and we work, as part of a consulting firm like Vertex, we work on a wide variety of facilities, and typically they're buildings and industries with high fire risk. So think oil and gas. Warehousing is a big one, like we're going to talk about today for your members, JC, and for Eric's members, which are a special type of warehousing for chemical distribution. That's a big focus area for us, as well as high risk buildings like even large multifamily residential, high rises, things like that with exceptional fire risk. We tend to work on those types of projects. So we've been staying busy a lot in the warehouse space with acquisitions recently, and REITs and 3POs like your listeners buying large groups of warehouses. And we're expecting good news today. We think the Fed's going to cut the rates today, and we're going to see a lot of activity. When that happens, we jump in. We have to do these due diligence evaluations on dozens of warehouses. So literally over the past few years, we've gone inside of hundreds of warehouses to see what these working operations look like, typical challenges, the fire protection issues that they're up against, including PFAS and others. So it's kind of a unique perspective. It's a lot of fun.
Great. Well, we're going to dig into this and what it means to those listening, those who are warehouse owners who are wondering about these inspections, about what they need to do to be in compliance. Nobody wants fines, right? But even more importantly, everyone wants to make sure that their facility is safe for their employees, for their products, for everything involved with that. So what are some of the typical fire protection challenges faced by warehouse owners that you most often see?
What we most often see when we do, for example, these due diligence evaluations are shortcomings that owners and operators are unaware of with fire protection, because it's such a non-intuitive issue sometimes. I remember when I first got in the field, you wouldn't expect that something like changing a racking arrangement, closing a flue space, changing from wooden to plastic pallets, for example, changing the way you encapsulate a pallet load, or adding just a new commodities such as lithium-ion batteries, or 5 years ago during COVID, it was solvent hand sanitizer, for example. You would never expect that these minor modifications that you're making in your storage array would have such a significant effect, but they often do. So the most common issues that we see with warehouse operators is that they are underprotected and unaware of it. And then it comes about either through something like a due diligence evaluation, that we do a lot of, or a fire official inspection, for example, or God forbid, a fire. A fire which gets out of control pretty quickly in storage. So that's a big issue. PFAS that Eric touched on, in warehouses, like a lot of the ACD members have, that where you have chemicals, ignitable liquids, they call them these days, which is combustible and flammable liquids. When you have those inside of a building, you often need foam to have suppression. Like Eric mentioned, water doesn't put it out. So these legacy foams that are more than 10 to 15 years old use this family of chemicals called PFAS, which is fantastic for firefighting, not good for toxicity, and it has a lot of environmental concerns. So that's another common issue. We see warehouse operators finding out that they have these stores of PFAS foam. And now I think we're up to about half the states in the country are prohibiting the use of that. So having to tear them out and replace them with something else. Other issues we hear about are obstructions on ESFR sprinkler systems, which is a special type of sprinkler, an early suppression fast response, and they're really sensitive to obstructions of things like fans, the proverbial, the big ass fans that everyone loves, the actual name, the fans, structure, lighting can be put in and obstruct those. In-rack sprinklers are another issue we commonly see that operators come across. When they have in-racks and they're operating, they tend to get damaged a lot by pallet loads or forklifts. If they're not placed the right way, they're kind of a nuisance, and they get damaged a lot. Then you have accidental discharge of fire sprinkler systems. So those are some typical issues that we hear a lot from warehouse operators.
That's Steve Kowkabany. He is joining us today, Executive Vice President, Fire Protection and Life Safety Services with the Vertex Companies. We're also joined by Eric Byer, President and CEO of the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. So, our members, I love our members. I get to meet them all throughout the year, and it's always interesting to learn what they're doing. Some of our members have done the same thing. They've moved the same type of material their entire existence for generations, and they have it down pat. But even with those folks, if it's something that's either hazmat or chemical, they have to keep up to date with what's happening, because it always changes, right? But then there's also people who love to spread out and start bringing in new products and start working with new vendors. And that, I think, has got to be tough too, because you start bringing in maybe a new product into your warehouse, and then if it is something with hazardous materials, with chemicals involved, you may not know all the rules and regulations. And then you mentioned state to state. In my previous position, I learned a lot about PFAS. We operated in the state of Maine, which was kind of on the forefront of some of the PFAS mitigation and all the legislation. And so I had a quick education on what PFAS are and how difficult they can really be to get rid of, in a sense, but almost impossible to get rid of. But to keep in compliance is certainly important. So what I'd like for you to talk maybe about the basics for warehouse owners and operators, what they need to know about hazmat storage at their facilities.
That is such a good question, JC. And really, hazmat is one that surprises a lot of people, because sometimes you don't know you have it. And I think the biggest thing for operators to keep track of is their storage array is changing, depending on what they're warehousing, is keeping the safety data sheets and keeping a hazardous material inventory statement, HMIS, as it's known in the fire codes across all 50 states. And that's just it could be a simple Excel spreadsheet. Just, what do I have? What kind of hazardous material risk is this? Is this something like what's called a corrosive, like an acid or a base that would burn your skin? Is it a flammable liquid? Is it toxic? Is it an oxidizer? So there's some of these unique risks of these chemicals, but knowing how much and what the quantities are, because across the fire codes of all 50 states, there's threshold quantities at which you change the consideration of your warehouse. So, for example, flammable liquids, it's 240 gallons. So if you have these 240 gallons, you're allowed to get 100% increase, so call it 480. So roughly 500 gallons, say maybe 10 drums of flammable liquid. At that point, you're exceeding your threshold, and then you have all these special requirements for your warehouse. If you store that indoors, like ventilation, like special classified electrical equipment, secondary containment. We see that a lot with warehouse operators getting surprised. So the biggest thing for them to know is to keep track of their hazmat quantities, inventories, and to know what they have. We see that sneak up on people all the time.
Yeah,
So
and JC, if I could chime in, just one of the things that I always counsel people, and people say, this is a sales job, and in many ways it is, but we're trying to be proactive because you've got so many. I talked about it, and Steve reinforced it. You've got the Fed, you've got the state, you've got the local guys all coming down here, but you look at warehouses. It could be highly, toxic, highly flammable products like our guys have. It could be motor oil. It could be a cleaning solution of some sort. It could be all these types of household products too that people think, oh, we don't have hazardous materials. When it starts to accumulate up to a certain point, as Steve was talking about, all of a sudden it becomes a hazard, and you got to be aware of that. So for anybody that claims they don't have chemicals in their warehouse, everybody does. They just may not realize it's part of another product that if you accumulate it over amount, it does become a hazard. So that's something that proactively anybody, I don't care what Harris, if you're a member of ours, IWLA, or anybody else, you got to really be wary of that because you don't want to be caught off guard. That's why we're trying to put this out there so people can protect themselves and say, let me get ahead of this. And if something happens where even if my local fire department wants to have what we have in place, but EPA doesn't, and there's going to have that fight, that turf battle at some point, at least I'm ready to transition to whatever happens because I got an evaluation to see what exactly I have ahead of me. That's the point of this, is to be proactive. Because if you're not, you're going to be caught with your pants down, pardon the expression, and it's going to cost you a whole lot more money in the long run.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eric. Thanks for chiming in with that. And actually, that's a really good time because I was thinking about, if someone's raising their hand right now, they're thinking, I need to have somebody come take a look. This would be a good time. What should they do? And please provide some contact information for people so they can reach out if they need to, Stephen.
Absolutely. Yeah. We always recommend, if there's not a program in place to address hazardous materials, for example, that they get one set up, a hazardous material inventory statement, get the system set up, get an evaluation, see what they're dealing with, see what type of protection they have, see what their hazards are. So you go in there, you're doing an inventory, you're setting this up for them basically the first time and doing an evaluation. That's what we do. And that's what we do a lot with our ACD members. That's what we're now going to do with IWLA members. That's available to your membership. I just recommend reaching out to you or Eric, and they'll get you in touch. We do those all the time. We do them constantly. We're able just to get people with their arms around it. It's just a one-time thing because then they get a path forward. They have it figured out and know what they're dealing with. And then they maintain that system and they're educated on it. So if you have an owner that's not comfortable digging in that level into, hazmat, management, that's where we can help them out.
Okay, good deal. And I imagine, Eric, you have people reaching out to your organization with questions all the time as well.
Yeah, we do. And to be honest, one of the things that people want to learn more about this service, which is I think what you're trying to get to, JC, the best thing to do is just go to the website for Ask, and it's Audit Safety Know, which is KNOW.com. And we'll have one of the big banners up there. We'll have the relationship we have with Vertex and who to contact and learn more. And the good thing is Steve's not out there to try to grab money for you. He wants to be upfront and try to work through what exactly you need. It's not just PFAS, as Steve indicated. There's other services they have, but the fire realm is where we're seeing, if you talk to the insurance folks, the regulators, it's the one area that remains a concern, and we want to make sure we get ahead of it. But if folks want to go to www.auditsafetyknow.com, that's where you can start the process.
AuditSafetyKnow.com. We'll repeat that again here later on in the program. But a great place to go and get some more information on our topic today. Our topic today is From PFAS to Protection, Insights from Vertex's Steve Kowkabany, and he's joining us today to talk about fire protection, and also, you've mentioned it a few times, PFAS. Many people have heard the word floating around. Those who are deeply involved, those in fire protection, certainly know what PFAS are. But tell us a little bit about PFAS.
That's a great question, JC. You're right. Everyone sees it in the news all the time and you hear about it and it's an environmental issue. What is it? PFAS, so there's perfluoral alkaline. It's a very long acronym. I don't even know that I can fully pronounce it. Me neither. A company that deal with the remediation, but basically it's a family of over 1,000 different variations of these chemicals that are super useful for our day-to-day life. We used to use them in nonstick pans. We use them for waterproof, clothing like Gore-Tex, like Teflon. Firefighting foams was a fantastic application of this, where we discovered the usefulness in the 50s, where it forms this film. So AFFF, if your listeners have ever heard of that, is aqueous film forming foam. So this foam, like I was trained on in the fire brigade 30 years ago, you just spray it down like a thin layer on a flammable liquid, like say gasoline fire, for example, and it just forms this coating and it smothers it. It seals it off from the oxygen and puts the fire out. It's beautiful, beautiful firefighting technology. The issue with PFAS, this family of chemicals, is that they have been found to be basically carcinogenic and toxic in different ways. We're still discovering what all they do, but it's one of those things. It's not like this very high threshold, extremely toxic chemical, but it builds up in your body. And what we found in this over the last 20 years is that it's in just basically every mammal on Earth. They found this in the blood, and it stays in your blood, not your fat. It's a little bit different. So it's bioaccumulative. It builds up in your body. We found this in polar bears and in the Arctic. It's in all of us as human beings. And one of the primary conduits, the way it gets into the environment, like the groundwater, for example, is firefighting foam. Because when we test or when we practice on the fire field or a sprinkler system discharges, for example, if that's not fully contained, if it gets in the groundwater, that's where it goes. Like, for example, the town just north of me in Atlantic Beach, Florida, has, basically like a third of the allowable tolerance in this. There's a military base there, and there's a ton of testing done, and so we pull water from our aquifer below ground, so it's there. We have some, and it's very common around the country, but that's PFAS, so very useful chemical. Since this time, we found substitutes for firefighting foam. They're different. They're coming along. Europe's about 10 years ahead of us. We're finding some very effective ones, but they vary quite a bit in exactly how they work. They're non-fluorinated foams that put out fire. So that's the deal with PFAS and fire protection.
It's called a forever chemical because it's so hard to break down. It's almost impossible to completely get rid of it. So, but it's one of those balances, like how many lives have been saved by the fire protection foam with PFAS, right? I mean, because it's so effective, it's a great chemical to use to stop fires. However, the bad part is getting into the groundwater and obviously into our bodies. So being a warehouse owner, you're listening to this with your fire protection system, you need to know if you're in compliance. That's kind of what we're touching on today. And we've got some experts here to tell you all about it. Steve Kowkabany is joining us here today. He is the Executive Vice President, Fire Protection and Life Safety Services at the Vertex Companies. And we also have Eric Byer joining us, who's the President and CEO of the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. We've got great partnership with ACD. In fact, signed an official memorandum of understanding, an MOU, last year as we continue to cooperate on issues impacting the supply chain and having mutual awareness on issues, regulatory issues, things just like what we're talking about today that affect our members, ACD members. And because of that partnership, you as a IWLA member are going to receive a discount for services related to what we're talking about today. So if you reach out, there is a discount for IWLA members. That would be something to touch on. Actually, what can people expect? So they reach out, they say, I want to have an inspection. They get the nice IWLA discounts. What are the next steps? What can they expect?
So what we do with that is we get in touch with your member. We get their information, find out what chemicals they have. We get the drawings. We look at their systems, find out what their inspection, testing, maintenance, what we're dealing with, what's being stored in the warehouse, what height, what are the physical characteristics of the building, what age. We try to sniff out if there is a special hazard situation where we have hazmat. If we have something like PFAS foam, we find all that out in advance, just talking to them on the phone. So we do a few weeks of due diligence, figuring everything out. Then we come out to the site for a couple days. We check everything out in detail, work closely with them, and get our arms around what's going on with their fire protection issues, specifically their hazmat. That tends to be the biggest issue. Sometimes it's other things. And then we work out a path forward with them. What's pragmatic, what's cost effective, but it's safe also, and it's going to keep them compliant for a long time. So this is out of their hair. How can they go forward and not need to keep repeating this process? So we work that out with them, and then we write basically a report memorializing that, and that's it. And that puts people, that historically, that's been a really good blueprint for how to address these fire safety issues in warehouses.
Are there any common either surprises or things that you see when you're out in the field doing these inspections that comes to mind that's kind of like either a common thread or common theme between when you're doing these inspections?
We see it a lot. We see it a lot of times there are sometimes there's unpermitted changes that they're just not aware of. Someone took over the warehouse, something's not permitted. We set up some new racks over here. We change this configuration. All of a sudden the exit signs are not right, the travel distances, the fire marshal comes in and inspectors cited them. We see that quite a bit. Or there has been, like we talked about, a chemical storage change that's exceeded a threshold. I mentioned the COVID example was a great example from 5 years ago. Everyone needed to warehouse hand sanitizer. We were using so much of it across the country. And no one really thought about it, but it's a flammable liquid. So fire marshals were flipping out because they had all this fire risk and they're worried about these warehouses burning down.
Yeah.
You didn't hear a lot about that. Another, like for example, a tragic fire we recently investigated was one here in Florida where they were just changing their storage array and doing some temporary storage of fireworks for one of the theme parks. And those are huge commercial grade fireworks. And they had them in there, had a fire, and they had a standard, pretty good sprinkler system, but not designed for fireworks and the whole, 4 fatalities, just total loss. Fire. So it's just like keeping an eye on that storage array. Those are the typical things that we find that kind of surprise owners are issues like that.
Yeah, and something you touched on at the start of this program was the mergers and acquisitions and how you go in, and that's a good time for that because of course someone's bringing on new properties and they're not maybe familiar whether or not those either it's new products that they're going to have or just new facilities that need to take a look at. And we see a lot of that certainly in our industry. We're seeing more and more of that with our own members expanding and doing some mergers and acquisitions. So that's a great place for you to come in as well to take a look at those new buildings. So anyone who's recently had that underway, you may want to consider reaching out as well. The website, as we've been telling you today, about that you want to check out is called auditsafetyknow.com. It's ask auditsafetyknow.com, and you'll get more information there. Joined by Stephen Kowkabany, who's joining us today from the Vertex Companies. Also, Eric Byer is the president and CEO of the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. We do have a few minutes left, so I do want to touch on some emerging technologies, and we see more and more of our members trying to find new ways to find revenue, new products to work with. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that. If it is a new tenant or new product, as we just mentioned, what are some emerging technologies or challenges that you're seeing?
Great question, JC. It's interesting. Storage or warehousing is changing, as everyone on this call knows better than anyone else. And we're getting, fulfillment centers, huge storage arrays. You look at an extreme example like Amazon, for example, and these fulfillment centers they're building that are over 3 million square feet, and they're high-rise buildings. You imagine taking 5 IKEAs and stacking them on top of each other, just huge. So, automated, so high degree of automatic storage and retrieval systems, so narrow aisles, robots effectively operating in there. So these are new challenges because we're seeing these storage arrays that are, sometimes over 100 feet tall. They've got robotic retrieval systems. They're not using traditional forklifts. So it's very difficult to access these systems to get up to, say, to inspect, say, something like a sprinkler in a rack. Mm-hmm. So challenges like that. And then amongst the products, lithium ion batteries. Obviously we've been making a huge transition to electrification in the country, whether it's vehicles or other things. Think of personal mobility, one wheels and scooters and all these things. So we have lithium ion batteries all over the place, and they're a unique fire challenge. They're difficult to put out. You really just kind of control them, control the fire and wet what's around it, just manage the fire. We're seeing a trend pretty new coming from Europe of nitrogen inerted warehouses, which do not use sprinklers at all in the fire protection world. They have a very low oxygen content that won't support fire. It will support life, so you don't suffocate if you go in there or asphyxiate, but you get tired really quickly. Those are really interesting. Very tall spaces like we talked about. Expanded plastics. We're always pushing the limits of what we're manufacturing, just even how we're storing simple things like mattresses. Mattresses are a massive fire challenge, but, we found new ways to store them because Factory Mutual and Underwriter Laboratories, UL, are constantly doing this burn testing with products, and they really understand the protection schemes for a variety of commodities. And we're pushing the limits of what we were able to do through some of this testing that's driven by largely like big box stores like Walmart and like Target and Bed Bath & Beyond. They're sponsoring this testing. We're finding new arrays that we can store with ceiling only protection without in-racks. That's a really good thing for warehouse operators. And then there's some special challenges with other types of vehicles, like for example, boats are just a notorious difficult challenge to protect fiberglass in a storage array and racks. But these are some of the things that we're seeing evolving in the warehouse space that are tricky and challenging, but also present some opportunities. But they are changing.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. This is Warehousing Unboxed, an IWLA podcast. Today's episode entitled PFAS to Protection Insights from Vertex's Steve Kowkabany. And I'm Jay Capron, JC, here at IWLA. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and the host of this podcast. We're also joined by Eric Byer, who's the President and CEO of the Alliance for Chemical Distribution. Eric, I'll get a final word from you, and then we'll go back to Steve to wrap things up. Anything you want to mention before we wrap things up, Eric?
No, I appreciate the opportunity and certainly the partnership with Steve and what they're doing with Vertex. It's, as I said, we're all about trying to be proactive here to make sure our guys are prepared for the future, especially with the regulatory and the insurance framework that we're all dealing with in today's world. So appreciate that partnership and certainly appreciate the opportunity to hop on with you guys, JC. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Well, we appreciate our partnership with you, certainly the Alliance for Chemical Distribution, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And I guess we'll give the final word now to Steve. Anything that you'd like to add?
I think that covered the basics. I think those are the basic things. There's a lot to keep track of in this busy day and age. But those are the things I think for your listeners to keep an eye out on. And if they ever need any extra help, I highly recommend getting in touch with Ask. Eric and his team do a phenomenal job helping out, owners, and their focus is chemical distributors, but that's a special type of warehouse operator usually. So they're very, very familiar with the space of your members, and they do a great job. So if you need the extra help, definitely give Eric and his team a call at Ask, and we can help you out. But I think those are some of the primary topical issues to keep an eye out for.
All right, great. Thanks. Appreciate it, Steve. And I want to give a shout out to Joe Donadoni, too, as well, from the Alliance for Chemical Distribution, for helping to coordinate things and set things up. So for Steve Kowkabany, Eric Byer, I'm Jay Capron, JC, here at IWLA. Until next time, this has been Warehousing Unboxed, an IWLA podcast. Today's program entitled PFAS to Protection Insights from Vertex's Steve Kowkabany. Talk to you next time.